Okay.
So just FYI, all the noise in the background is my kid playing with the truck. But yeah, so I've known Mike for a little bit. He's an advocate for mass timber construction and sustainability, sustainable design. Hang on 1 second. But anyways, yeah, so back to what I was saying. So Mike is an architect and also a sustainability advocate. He's got extensive knowledge in mass timber construction, sustainable transportation. He's a big biker. I mostly know him just from his advocacy, writing articles and plethora of outlets, including The Urbanist, Seattle Times, Tree Hugger, and I think I saw you in an AIA article today being quoted. But yeah, so I'll let him sort of take the rest of it. But yeah, good pal. He's got a lot of interesting thoughts on the subject matter of mobility.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Give a thumbs up. All right, let me share my screen. Are you guys seeing the mobility transition? Okay. So yeah, thanks for having me on. My name is Mike Eliason. I'm an architect in Seattle. Spent a couple of years working abroad in Germany. Grew up in Germany and Belgium as a kid. My identity kind of oscillates between the US and Europe. So Ryan asked me to talk about the mobility transition. I'm not going to talk about 99 specifically. This will be more along the lines of what is going on, mostly in Europe. It's where a lot of the mobility transition stuff is happening. It's definitely oriented around cities. There's some key takeaways that I think that we could and should start adopting. So I'll run with this for, I have about 50 slides, so maybe 20 minutes or so. And then we talked about opening it up for questions if necessary. All right, so the status quo. I think we all are pretty aware of how bad the status quo is on 99. And then we could probably look at any other street in a growing city and identify a couple of issues. So a big one is just we're not meeting our emissions targets in the city of Seattle. More and more people are moving here. They're still driving. We have more people, more cars. We don't have a high number of EVs, and that's likely not going to change in the next decade with the way things are going. So we're kind of whiffing on a lot of our climate goals. The green line here is what the city was aiming for, and we're just not anywhere close to meeting the climate goals. So that's kind of one issue. Another is just, streets are loud, and the reason that they're loud is because of cars and trucks. They also pollute. This is a map of Oakland. But you could also, find similar maps if they existed for the city of Seattle. The highways will be the most congested, so I-5, 90, right? And then it just kind of gets a little bit less and less polluted as you get away from those streets. But the air quality is a big issue. And there are a multitude of health effects that go along with that as well. This is a map of Berlin. Again, the US isn't really good at mapping sound in our cities. The EU mandates it, so all the EU cities have like regular sound maps and modeling that they do. This big blue line here is the loudest part of the city. That's actually an airport that's now defunct, right? So they're actually making steps to make their city quieter. Again, it's the same thing. Your loudest areas, in Seattle are going to be around the port. They're going to be the highways, the railroads, and that's kind of an intermittent thing. But our arterials are incredibly loud. And even some of our residential streets, just because of the way that they're designed, can be pretty loud as well. I think all of us are still a little bit, or at least I am, and our household is reeling from the effects of the heat dome this summer. It's cooled off. I feel like we kind of dodged the bullet, knock on wood, on the smoke. But climate change and global warming for our household is kind of an ongoing discussion. We don't own a car. When we moved to Germany, we sold our car, so we're car free. We have 2 kids, and we get around by cargo bikes, foot and bus, and gig car or a rental when we need it. But we try to keep a pretty low carbon footprint. And then the other thing in the back of our mind that we should be thinking about, and I would add this into your document, Tom, is the PSRC's 2050 Vision 2050 document and how that plays into the comp plan as well. Um, 1.5 million people are going to be moving here in the next 20, 30 years. And if those people all bring their cars, right, like our roads are just going to be at a complete standstill. And this is kind of happening all over the world. Cities are densifying, they're growing, people are moving to the city. If they all bring their cars, it's just going to be mass congestion. So, we need to start thinking about, okay, how can we move people and goods and more efficiently, more effectively, in a way that's also better for the environment. Cars just take up a lot of space. This is a transit professor from the city of Vienna from a long time ago. He had this device that he called the Gatezeug, the Go machine, and basically modeling like how much space a car takes up in an urban environment, right? It's sizable, especially if it only has 1 or 2 people in it. And so you can kind of, you've all seen the diagrams where it's like 50 people in a bus, 50 cars, 50 pedestrians, 50 cyclists, right? So it's really starting to think about, okay, if everybody here was driving a car by themselves, and then we had another 1 million people in 20 years, right? Like there's just physically no way to take all of that car without like destroying more of the city. And we did that in the 50s, 60s, 70s with highway expansions, and that has environmental racism, exacerbated sprawl. There's a whole slew of issues involved with that. So I don't think that we should be going that route as well. And then cars are just getting a lot bigger. So BMW, this is 40 years difference between these two BMWs. I have kids. We walk around the city a lot. We're very cognizant crossing the street that cars are bigger, they're faster, the front end bumpers are not near as safe as they used to be. And the school drop off sightline issues for us, like this image alone scares the crap out of me. Like we just need to start designing cars that are more people friendly. And I think that's part of it. Another thing too is especially in the last year, the road deaths have spiked dramatically. I think there are a number of reasons for that. One is there's just not been any enforcement on the streets for speeding and things of that nature. People have just been flying. Here we see it in the city, on a daily basis. People just drive as fast as they can. They run red lights. It's kind of horrifying at times, and we're definitely seeing the effects of that, especially on streets like Aurora after this weekend. So what is the mobility transition or the mobility turnaround? It's the Mobilitätswende in German. It's really this rethinking, this re-envisioning of moving people and goods in a manner that's more cost effective, more environmentally sustainable, more space efficient. And the way to really think about this is that we're inverting the traffic pyramid, right? So planes have the worst carbon footprint, so they're at the bottom. Private cars, they're next up, and then building up from there all the way to walkability. This is kind of the city of Freiburg has been taking this approach for decades, which is where I worked the first time I went to Germany. It's also where I met my wife, and it's also the image behind me. Really small city, but like honestly, the most livable place I've ever been. Quiet, safe streets, walkable, bikeable, incredible, public transit, and they sell themselves as like a city of short distances. They, because they're prioritizing the walking and the cycling and the public transport, like you just don't need a car to survive in the city, and you kind of don't need a car to survive in Germany anyway, even if you're doing a lot of traveling. Here in Seattle in the US, we tend to prioritize cars a lot, or we'll try to equally prioritize everything. Well, we know when that works or when that happens, right? Like we don't get equal prioritization at all. Someone ends up, getting the short end of the stick. And on 99, it's pedestrians if you're on most of the street. So it's about sustainable urban mobility, drastically reduced emissions, safe streets. Like I said, the movement of people and goods, e-logistics. So that's using electric vehicles, electric cargo bikes, trams to move goods, and cargo bike logistics. And so you can have cargo bikes that have a motor, an electric motor, or ones that don't, depending on if you're in like a flatter area or a place with hills. And all the German cities have like a mandate to start working on this. This is the city of Essen's diagram showing that they're going from a lot of car infrastructure, about 50% here, and then they're trying to get everything down to be about a quarter right? And so that will reduce their overall emissions pretty significantly, especially since their public transit is incredibly green. I don't think it's 100% clean, but it's close. Again, the city of Amsterdam, it's kind of the same thing. We're growing, but when we grow, we need to be greener. We need to be more livable. We need to make more room for people and the movement of goods. We need to be inclusive, right? So I really like these diagrams for kind of helping to tell that story. And again, this goes back to like, the movement of goods, movement of people. So a big part of that is corridor capacity, right? So if you have a car-only street, you're only moving, this guy here, a couple thousand people per hour on a 3.5 meter, 10.5 foot, 11-foot lane. By the time you get to BRT and light rail, you're moving significantly more people. And so it's really thinking about, okay, how can we prioritize the right end, right? The more sustainable ends, lower carbon emissions, move more people than the left. And this is I love this image because so much of the city's policies around climate action have to do with electric vehicles. Well, if 1 million people move here and 100% of them have EVs, we're not solving congestion. We're not solving safe streets. We're not solving moving people throughout the city. The salmon die-off, right? There's a whole slew of issues that we're not addressing. So the mobility transition is really 3 themes. One is sustainable transportation. It's the redemocratization of public space. I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And then changing funding priorities. WSDOT spends billions and billions of dollars on car infrastructure, but they could be spending billions and billions of dollars on safer streets, on cycle tracks, on sidewalks on Aurora. And there are all these, intangible and tangible benefits that come with it. Reduced emissions from vehicles. It's quieter. Sometimes it's dramatically quieter. The livability increases. The health of the population increases because they're walking more. They're getting around by bike more. They're not breathing in fumes, relentlessly. So zero emissions freight is a big part of this. At first I really kind of despised all of these electric vans looking kind of robotic, and now it's kind of like my kids adore it, and I'm like, okay, if they get it, if my kids find it attractive, fine, it's whatever. But so zero emissions freight, so electric vans, cargo bikes, electric cargo bikes, and delivery trams. This is one I'll show you a couple of pictures later. It just blows my mind. So this is Rewe Group. This is a grocery store in Germany. They'll go out and they'll deliver groceries to your house. So it's similar to some of the delivery systems that we have here. Again, zero emissions, e-bikes, e-cargo bikes. You can also use similar programs for delivering drinks to bars and restaurants, or food, produce, and things of that nature. This is the Jones Brothers Dairy in London. So London has this huge low emission center, and they've done a lot of things to make it more difficult to drive in the city because they've been prioritizing the more sustainable modes of transportation. And so what Jones Brothers figured out was it was cheaper for them to buy these vehicles and maintain them, the electric cargo bikes. It was faster because they could get around the city to places faster than you could by van, with the way that the city of London itself has been redesigning itself. Your fuel costs are basically zero, or maybe a little bit for electric charging. And then the other thing that they loved was they weren't getting parking tickets. So before, and see this more so in New York City than here, but we do have a lot of it here, especially in denser areas, is delivery vehicles will double park and they'll just run in, run out. And in London, they're pretty proactive about giving tickets. They were in Berlin and Munich as well. And so they just realized that there was this way of taking their goods, getting it out to the market in a way that was environmentally sustainable, faster, and more cost effective for them. So it's really hitting like this triple bottom line that I think that we should be focusing on a lot more. It also has to do with rethinking, whole delivery systems, last mile systems. This is Hermes, another package delivery thing, but they have these huge cargo bikes that they can take into like the car-free parts of the city, to drop off packages rather than taking these huge vans, all around. And so where are the opportunities for that in a city like Seattle? Where are the incentives in that for the city of Seattle? UPS and I think FedEx were piloting cargo bike delivery at like UW and a couple of other places, but we don't really have the infrastructure or the network yet to really make that kind of shine. And this is in the city of Frankfurt, which also has a hammering man. It's delivery of goods on trams, kind of off peak normally, uh, where they will be picked up and delivered last mile by cargo bike. So it's using this network of zero emissions delivery, and reaching more of the city. Uh, really kind of, we don't have a really good tram network, streetcar network in Seattle, but like I just love like the creativity of some of these programs. And other cities have been doing this as well. Zurich uh, transports recycling on their tram lines. The city of Dresden used to transport goods for BMW's electric vehicles on the tram lines as well. So there's some really interesting opportunities around logistics on that. And the last mile thing I think is probably the most critical. Like think about, we can have little warehouses in the city that are kind of distribution points, but it's how do you get things from those points, to businesses or to people's houses without, having all of these cars just inundate our street. So again, it's the cargo bikes, it's the e-cargo bikes, the electric vans, the delivery trams. And so that's the logistics part of it. But then there's also like, how do you move people? Car share is pretty common here in Seattle now. Is more of a co-op model in a lot of European cities. So there was no gig, or I don't remember the precursors to gig, although they were German. But the idea is that there are fewer cars on the road, right? So you have fewer cars, there's less emissions, you can move more people and goods. It also means that you have lower car costs. So we don't own a car. We use gig a couple of times a month, but even with like all of the usages of gig that we've had to date and car rentals for vacations, like it's still a fraction of what it was when we had our last car. The city of Vienna has really been piloting the e-cargo bikes as rentals, which I think is really fascinating for a number of things. One is you can use it to move house, and this is in Seestadt-Aspern, which is this huge walkable transit-adjacent development a little bit north of the core of the city. You can use it to pick up groceries, furniture, get gardening supplies. There's a big, there's a lot of public gardens in this part of the city. Transport your kids, to sporting events if you need to, or just they have different bikes, right? So you can test ride different cargo bikes and see if one fits your lifestyle. And all of these buildings in Seestadt have these massive, wonderful, protected bike storage facilities as well. So like if you buy a cargo bike, you have a really good place to put it. And a big part of it is just rethinking cars. So we go bike camping a lot. It limits where we can go camping because of the distance, but like it's the kids love it. We love it. We were really fortunate to be able to ditch our car when we moved the first time or the second time to Germany, and then have really made a cognizant effort to like not buy a car moving back. It definitely has been a challenge in the city of like Seattle, where we don't have the greatest bike network, we don't have the greatest pedestrian network, and our transit isn't even that great. Another component of it then is the redemocratization of streets. So instead of having streets solely for cars, like how do we think about moving people? How do we prioritize sustainability? So this is a former car street in the city of Freiburg, connecting the downtown core with residential areas outside of the city. So it's bike and tram only. There's a lot of so sponge city. So it's a infrastructure for stormwater, rainwater deluges, which as we've seen with a lot of the flooding in the last 6 months, I think is going to become more critical as well. It also just means you have a better air quality on that street, reduced heat island effect as well. So I used to bike, back and forth. I would take this route to go visit my now wife. And like even late at night, like it was always cool. It was always quiet. It was a really nice way to get around the city and not, be inundated by cars. More gray to green infrastructure. This is in the city of Bilbao in Spain. Again, former car infrastructure, now prioritizing the movement of people via tram, bike, car. Lots of green space. Again, we're reducing the heat island effect. The addition of a promenade here, along the river as well. Freiburg is really big into bike streets. They don't have a super connected bike only network, but these are streets that are prioritizing bikes. So cars are considered guests, similar to like a Wohnhof, but traveling at bike speed, not walking speed. Cars can't pass bikes, and the idea it's a street that's supposed to be low traffic, low stress, so people can get around the city. And another big part of this, and the city, I think, has been really, really awful about this, is curb management. So repurposing curbs for cargo bikes, deliveries, cargo bike deliveries, daycare pickup by something other than car, school drop off by something other than car, and even long-term storage. So like they have these really wonderful boxes that you can park your bikes in if you don't have a place in your residence to do it. It's about slow streets. So rethinking how we design our intersections with diverters to prevent cut throughs, to prevent speeding, bulb outs, really slow down the kind of the pace of life and make it much more pedestrian friendly in that regard. Amsterdam is taking like the car-free aspect of a lot of their streets, or extremely car light, almost to like the limit of what you can do. Like, this is a former, car-centric street. They've removed all the cars. They've put parking under this little river here. I believe that's where a lot of the parking has been repurposed there. But it really turning the street into a place for the neighborhood, right? And so it's bike friendly, it's pedestrian friendly, it's building space for community rather than for cars. And then pedestrian zones. Every German city I've ever been to, visited, lived in, from the tiniest mountain village to Munich and Berlin, have entire sections of the city where just cars aren't allowed. And we almost have this, we could have this at Pike Place Market. We almost have this at Occidental. I'm sure you could think of several neighborhoods or streets where you would just love to walk places and just have this kind of freedom of movement that we don't presently have. And so it's pedestrian friendly, prioritizes business. You generally find them in the urban core, but sometimes you find them, especially in larger cities, like every neighborhood kind of will have its own little pedestrian zone as well. And it's car free in quotes, but it's not, deliveries are still allowed. A lot of times bikes can still get through, EMS can get through. So on this sign, the Lieferverkehr frei, these are just the times the deliveries are allowed to come into the pedestrian zone. And these are, these kinds of regulations are common in like every European city that does it. There's also the Winkelhof, which is, I don't know if Brock is on the line. Everybody at SDOT loves to talk about the Wohnhof, but nobody knows what a Wohnhof is. A Wohnhof is a residential only street. So if you have businesses on it, it's a Winkelhof. And so it's kind of taking similar concept. This one isn't car free, it's car light, but you're still prioritizing high quality of urban space, pedestrian friendliness, safe streets, deliveries and stuff are still allowed as well. How are we doing on time? Good?
I think we're good. Yeah, keep going.
Okay, all right. And then the other thing too is like German cities, Austrian cities, French cities, they're all moving towards, they already have these pedestrian zones. They're expanding their pedestrian zones, or they're having these areas adjacent to the pedestrian zones that are traffic calmed. So they're quiet streets, they're car light. A lot of times there'll be bollard access, for residents only, or for deliveries and things of that nature. And so again, it's about creating this kind of atmosphere where it's a little bit more difficult to get around by car, but like if you're walking or biking, taking public transit, like you have no problem getting around the city. And then another part of it too is taking away space for cars and giving it over to people. So this is the German city of Siegen. They took away a 200 space parking lot, and then they turned it into this huge, promenade right on the river that the residents can go down to. It's also part of their stormwater management. It opened up more space for them. It daylighted the river. Again, we're reducing the heat island effect. There's a lot less surface area, there are a lot less hot cars. And it becomes like this space that you want to be in. Like you don't want to hang out in the parking lot, but I mean, my kids and I could spend so much time in a place like this. Like I actually look at something like this and I go, why don't we have this on either side of the Fremont Ship Canal? It could be nice. And again, so it's just more space for people, more space for residents. It's about higher quality of life. Grade of Blue is also, this is in Berlin. This is another big one. Rethinking car storage to parks, car storage to trees, to rainwater management. And we're seeing that a little bit in Seattle, but not to the extent that, Amsterdam is going to remove 10,000 parking spaces in the next couple of years. The mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, is removing over half of the on-street parking spaces, for these kinds of things. Tactical urbanism can be a big part of it, right? How do we get people to think about, all of these options that we could be doing if no one knows about it? Well, the city of Vienna had these car-free days on Maria-Hilfer-Strasse, which is kind of the main drag of their pedestrian zone now. And you demonstrate these changes of what a slow street can look like, what kind of events you could have. And you use these events to like build support and build community. We see this in LA a little bit with the Ciclovia, but we don't really have any like kind of regular events. So maybe we should start doing that. Another one that the city of Vienna is looking at taking their ringstrasse, which I will say is like a much nicer 99. And they're looking at removing like almost all of the cars, all of the car streets. They're going to prioritize open space for pedestrians. Sponge city. So again, stormwater management, rainwater management is about reducing the heat island effect. The bike lanes, there's a big tram line that goes down the middle. They'll revamp that so that it's more functional for residents and tourists, because this is kind of also the line that strings together a bunch of tourist spots as well. How do you take a highway and turn it into a green street? Again, to me, this is much more appealing than the loud street a couple blocks over from where we live. And Amsterdam, like I said, is just kind of moving the needle like leaps and bounds on so many of these issues. Another issue that we don't really have here in the US are mobility, or another topic, are mobility hubs. And what these are, these kind of centralized transportation hubs. So you've got green mobility, you've got transit connections, bus, light rail station, you've got bike share, car share, EV charging stations. A lot of them can have package drop-offs. And then you can get into like these really dense facilities where they have a ton of, maybe there's like a ton of bike share, a ton of car shares or rental cars that you could get, but then it's also got a daycare. So when you drop your kid off here at the mobility hub to take the bus downtown, you're not having to haul your kid downtown like I used to do, right? Or maybe there's a grocery store, so that when you're coming back from work and you're on your way home, this is your transfer point. You can run into the grocery store and pick up what you need for dinner. There's all of these opportunities for building community around our transit hubs that we just, to be blunt, like it's not even on our radar. And flood protection is a huge topic in Europe right now, especially with all of the huge floods that they had. We all saw what happened in New York a couple weeks ago. I think that we're probably not too far from a lot of this as well. Our topography is wildly different, and so the outcomes a lot of this could actually be, I think, even worse than if it's flat. So how we start thinking about public space and stormwater management, I think, needs to be at the forefront, especially as climate change starts to kick up the intensity of some of those storms, and also just how quickly we need to be doing these things, right? So we're talking about the comp plan. We'll take the comp plan is a document that we're going to update in a couple of years, and it won't really take into effect for 5, 6, 7 years, if not longer, right? In a decade, we're supposed to be like at the limit of where we can even affect, right, hitting 1.5C anymore, right? So if we're not really changing the things that we need to be doing now in a rapid manner, we're not going to be mitigating climate, to the degree that we probably should or could. And so in my mind, like Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, who's apparently now running for the president of Paris, is like at the forefront of this, rolling out a huge bike network, removing a ton of parking for the residents who live there, vamping up and increasing the reach of their already incredible transit. A big focus of what they're doing is the 15-minute city. This is a concept that we could talk about at a later time, but it's really about everything that you need to live: medical, open space, goods, shops, community, schools, right? Everything can be accessed within 15 minutes by foot or bike. Think about how you live in Seattle, like that's almost impossible. But the idea is that it's a more social city. It's a city that cares you kind of have to care at that point about what's going on around you. You know, solidarity is a big part of where that is going as well. And so the question I have is, what are we waiting for? We don't have a lot of safe streets. We don't have any pedestrian zones. We have a really, really poor bike network. Our land use is horrendous. We have really bad last mile solutions. We keep whiffing on our climate goals, but we have really good transit. Like, honestly, our transit for the US is incredible. And some of the stuff that Ryan has posted shows that it can be even better and more comprehensive. So like, we can easily start to build and incorporate a lot of these things into how we are as a city, be more sustainable, be more livable, you know, hopefully be more affordable. But like, there are all these things that we need to start. In my mind, it's like, we need to be focusing on how we transition, you know, in order to meet our climate goals. So that is all I got. I think I went a little bit long. Apologies.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. There's a lot to think about there, and a lot of ideas that we might think about applying to Aurora as we start to reimagine it. And honestly, what I took away from all that, I was just blown away by the number of examples you came up with. You know, it seems like almost every city in Europe has a really awesome street that's been converted or is going to be converted, and it's astounding that we don't have that yet in the United States that we can point to easily.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, and I could talk about the development, the land use. It's a big component of it as well. Like, we're not doing anything right is kind of how it feels like. And having been back there and worked on some of this and come back here, like, the drive is like even higher because we're so much further behind than I thought we were.
I see Summer has a hand up. Do you have a question or comment, Summer?
Yes, trying to unmute myself. I definitely have a question about the merging of this policy. I love it. I mean, you know, I've always been sold and follow all your tweets, Mike. Thank you. But knowing also our political system, and we have some council members who are supportive of a lot of these ideas, especially some closed streets, et cetera, and knowing our political system and that we have a pretty mayor heavy executive focus for our city government, how could we best start to move towards this system from a policy perspective, but do it politically?
I mean, I think having a strong mayor is a benefit, and I would like Anne Hidalgo is like the preeminent example, right? Example of like how having a strong mayor pushing these ideas forward, and or also Valerie Plante in Montreal, you know, really kind of leading with you know, these visionary goals or aims, right? Like, nobody running for mayor since I've lived here, and it's 16 years now, 15 years, has really had like this overarching vision of where the city could go or should go. It's been more about management, and I think that you can look at the city and say the management isn't doing so well, and we don't really know where we're going. So electing a mayor, a strong mayor who has that vision, I think is a critical component.
Thanks for that question, Summer, because that kind of gets to one of our agenda items tonight, which is talking about our advocacy strategy and how we're going to hopefully put pressure on the future mayor of Seattle to make Aurora's vision come to pass. And we'll get into some of those details soon. What I'd like to do is move on to some of the business we have for this month's meeting, and then at the end of the meeting, we'll come back around to questions, conversation. And Mike, if you can stick around, we'd love to kind of have people ask questions. And of course, you can weigh in, or if they have questions directly for you at that time, we can address them.
Yep.